All right. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to have this fireside chat, as we're calling it. I'm Jody Bechtold, and Robin Witt is joining me from the Better Institute. And we are so excited to have Linda Uphoff be able to share her story as an affected other from problem gambling. So, Linda, without any further ado, please take it away.
Thanks, Jody. I so appreciate being here with both of you. Uh, Gosh, a few years ago, I never would have imagined I'd be sitting here telling this story. My journey started about 5 years ago with a phone call that changed everything. I thought at the moment, I really didn't know that. My son, who was a recent college graduate, he had a good job, he was living independently. He called asking to borrow a few $100s, said he'd lost a bet and needed a little help. I remembered thinking, why are you calling me for this? That is such an odd request. And it was so out of character. He had always had a lot of savings in his bank account, so I thought. But, something really felt off in that conversation. I heard it in his voice, but every part of me said yes anyway. And I sent the money, and I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next couple of months, the truth trickled out in pieces. He'd lost a lot more than a few $100s. He had credit cards I didn't know existed. He was borrowing money from friends. He was not in a good place. And he'd been hiding it for months while the hole got deeper and deeper. Coming to me must have been a last resort. At this point, I think he believed that he'd extinguished all other options. Or maybe part of it was just a cry for help. I'm not sure. But looking back, here's what haunts me the most. I had no idea, like none. Unknowingly, he had been sports betting on his phone 24/7. At the time, I thought he was just a sports fan. Our whole family is into sports. My sons were into fantasy leagues growing up. They did March Madness brackets. And even as a tradition at bowl game time over the holidays, my husband would give him a couple $100 or whatever to just play on some bowl games. So it was all in fun. My sons were also competitive college athletes, so sports were a really big part of our family. Excuse me. So to me, his interest in sports looked normal, like completely normal. But in gambling and sports betting addiction, there are signs, but they are subtle and they are really easy to miss. There's no smell on their breath, there's no drugs in their drawer, there's no slurred speech at dinner. And it is so easy to explain it away as just normal youth or young adult behavior. By the time it's often noticed, as it was in our where how we found ourselves, the damage is already done. Um, and I had no idea how to help, absolutely none. So I did what any parent would do. I tried to fix it. I paid off his debts. I thought, okay, clean slate, crisis is over. You don't need to chase losses anymore. And now we can move forward. That is not how this addiction works. And what I actually did was I removed every natural consequence and I made it easier for the cycle to continue. I didn't help him, I was enabling him. I didn't realize it at the time. I just loved him and wanted to help in the only way I knew how. And we were completely lost. We didn't know what questions to ask, we didn't know what doors to close, what boundaries to set. We didn't know how to love him and hold him accountable at the same time. And I just kept thinking if I can just solve the money problem, like everything else like will fall into place. But the money isn't the problem. The money is the symptom, and I didn't know the difference. So, I because I didn't know what to do, I did what I've always done. I intellectualized it. I searched for answers and I did it in a big way. Like I went back to school. I enrolled in a master's program in counseling. And I did this not because I really wanted to be a therapist per se. I did it because I thought just maybe the answers were in a textbook somewhere. Somebody was going to tell me how to fix this. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The program didn't just teach me about addiction. It really taught me about myself. It learned that I can't fix him. I can only change myself and how I respond to him. And every time I bailed him out, I was removing a consequence. And actually, deep down, really more than that, I was sending the message that I don't believe you're capable of helping yourself. That's a really tough message to send to your kid. And I was also avoiding my own grief, my own fear and feelings of failure as a parent. It was easier to focus on fixing him than really to sit with how powerless I felt. I just went into action mode. But with education and support, the framework was getting clear. I started to understand what I needed to do. And what I eventually learned was that letting go is an act of love. Every instinct we have as a mother is to protect our child, to remove obstacles, to catch them when they fall. And I think back, it's like just when they're toddlers and we want to catch them every time they fall, it just means we're never letting them fall and letting them learn how to pick themselves back up. And I knew that intellectually, but actually stepping back and letting those consequences land and holding those boundaries, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And it's still really, really hard. I had to learn that you can love someone and you can still let them face consequences. You can support someone without saving them, and you can be there without being the answer. Um, Fast forward 5 years, I am now a licensed professional counselor associate in Texas, and I specialize in youth and young adult problem gambling. And here's what I've learned through my own experience and failures: parents need a plan and they need guidance to navigate this. When parents realize the crisis they're in because of gambling, the first thing they need to understand is you're not powerless, but you do have to learn about what works and what doesn't work with gambling addiction. You need to step back, you need to create boundaries, like real ones, set up accountability systems, figure out how to close doors to gambling access, which is getting more and more complex every single day. You need to understand the financial impact, the guardrails to put in place, establishing consequences, and even rewards. It's about encouraging better. It's encouraging building better habits. And then you got to learn how to respond to consistently when things go wrong, when those boundaries get tested. What makes my perspective just a little different is I understand what families are going through, not just clinically, but personally. I 100% know what it feels like to lie awake at 3 a.m. in the morning, like worrying and wondering, did I cause this? Or, is he ever going to be okay? Is he going to have a future? So, through professional and personal experience, I've learned what it takes to find a better way through. And that's why I do what I'm doing now, because what happened to my family is happening to families everywhere, and most of them don't even know it yet. Um, it's scary. Youth gambling addiction it's already in your communities, it's in your schools, it's probably in families they just haven't told you yet. The shame is enormous, the secrecy is deep, more than other addictions. And most families don't even recognize it as an addiction. They think it's an immaturity, poor choices, or a normal phase. I've heard some kids say, I don't gamble. Oh, but I sports bet. So there's just there's this view that this is not an addiction, that this is just normal behavior. But early intervention changes everything. When we catch it early, when they're still young, still at home, you control their finances, that's when families have the most leverage. But all families, even those of older children or spouses who are struggling with gambling, they all need structure. They need help understanding what to do and, just as importantly, what not to do. I'm an example that recovery is possible, and not just for the person gambling, but for the whole family. My son, he's 1 year gambling free. At least I believe he is. And that matters, that qualifier, because part of my recovery has been learning to live with uncertainty. I've had to learn to rebuild trust while holding this space for the reality that relapse can happen and it's out of my control. But here's what I've come to see: the work we do on ourselves, on our own recovery, our own hard work to change, figuring out what we can and can't do, that's what really matters. When we change, our loved ones notice. It's almost contagious. My son didn't need me to fix him. He needed the system to change. And then he needed to see me changing too, and with that system. I am so grateful to say that as a result of both of our recovery, we've formed a new kind of relationship with each other. We are rebuilding trust, and we have a relationship where we can see each other for both our flaws and our best selves. You know, I'm a mom. I'm really hopeful. As a clinician, I'm also hopeful. But I know the road ahead is a marathon and not a sprint. Um, I never wanted to become an expert in youth gambling addiction. Like, this is the path my life has taken. And I do this work because I don't want other parents to make as many mistakes as I made along the way. Like, families aren't helpless, but they need guidance, and they need a permission to stop fixing. That's the work. And from my own experience, I think that's the hardest part.
Thank you so much. It takes a lot to share your story, to share it publicly. And yet we do know that working with families and changing the rules of the system is how everybody gets the help they deserve. Can we ask you a couple different questions?
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned your family was really into sports and fantasy leagues. Initial gambling activity looked, quote, normal, right? So when you look back, was there a single most telling clue that it wasn't just a sports hobby or, but more of a problem, where there are subtle changes in his attitude, mood, engagement, something like that, that would have been a red flag?
Yeah, the red flag I couldn't ignore anymore was when I learned he was borrowing money from friends. That made no sense to me, given what I knew about my son's finances and everything. But there were other things I noticed that didn't make sense when it comes to the sports. He started following sports he'd never cared about before. Suddenly he's watching hockey, golf, sports that weren't in his like part of his usual rotation, I would say. And then there was the shift in mood. He became quiet, avoidant, just generally not his happy self. I Something was off. And as a mom, you kind of feel it. And those behavioral changes, the withdrawal, the mood shifts, recognizing those matters just as much as the financial signs for sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those. The non-financial warning signs sometimes are the ones that get missed. So I appreciate you being able to point those out. So when we're talking about like support versus enabling, you had said that paying off his debts removed the natural consequences and enabled the cycle to continue. How did you finally internalize the difference between loving and rescuing versus loving and holding him accountable?
Yeah, I would say this is something I really struggled with. And here's what I learned: the addicted person becomes powerless over the behavior. Um, but the parents are also powerless to change it for them. So the difference is this: like, you love the individual, but you don't love the behavior. Um, you create boundaries around yourself and that behavior. So it sounds like, I love you. You're clearly suffering from what you're doing. I'm not okay with this, and here's why. If you're ready to do something about it, I'm here to support you, but I'm not available to bail you out. That does not mean you abandon them. It does not mean, it means you stop removing the consequences that might actually motivate them to get help. And, I want to be clear here. My son didn't always ask to be bailed out. I did that voluntarily sometimes out of my own discomfort with watching him struggle. And that's enabling too.
Yeah, that's a common one. I appreciate you saying that. because parents really do get in there and want to fix it without even, your son asking you to fix it.
Mhm.
So, okay. For setting boundaries for a parent who, is currently being asked for money or is thinking about paying off a debt to make it all go away, um, what's the first most manageable boundary they could set, and how would you advise that they hold it, to make sure that it works? What
Yeah.
would you suggest?
Say no. It took a couple of relapses and a family counseling session before I could really hold a boundary. The first time I said no, I tried to do it kindly and lovingly. Like, I'm here to love you and support you, but I'm not going to fix this for you. It's hard. Like you said, every part of me and parents want to fix this, but starting to say no was very freeing. Um, and I would say saying no with love is actually a gift. It's saying, I believe you're capable of figuring this out. I'm not going to keep sending the message that you can't handle your own life. He was an adult. But know that I'm here to support you and I will help you and I will get the help you need. It wasn't perfect. I slipped up a lot. But each time it gets a little easier. Every time you say no, it gets easier. And it sends a clear message about you, what you will and won't do. And it forced that accountability.
Good. And so you mentioned a family therapy session. And as clinicians, we have found that it's essential for parents to be a united front and to be on the same page when it comes to supporting their child's recovery. How did that look for you and your spouse in terms of aligning, making sure there are no secrets between the two of you, and how you were going to support your son?
Yeah, this is so important. Whether parents are married or not, you have to be aligned. There's power in that. In my situation, I tried handling this alone at first. I'm going to be honest, until I realized how serious it was. I just had a history of trying to fix things as a parent. And I often took on too much when it came to the kids. This created a lot of anxiety and fear, and I carried that until I finally leaned on my husband and stopped trying to fix it alone. Another thing gamblers are going to do is they're going, especially kids, they are going to triangulate. They're going to say, please don't tell mom, please don't tell dad. So we sat down together, my husband and I, we agreed no more bailing out and complete transparency with each other, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Then we sat down with our son and made it clear this is a team effort and there are no more secrets in our family. And I like the saying, secrets keep you sick. Um, so if I could really give parents out of this conversation one piece of advice, it's show a united front. It is so powerful to be in this together as a team.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's a lot of times where one parent is reaching out for help, trying to fix it, trying to take care of it. The other partner's works a lot, is too busy, don't want to bother them. And you're right, that united front and being aligned is so critical. Yeah. What about getting help for yourself, right? Shame can be a huge barrier. Like you said, creating the secrecy, but you eventually found that you needed to get your help. We know there's Gam-Anon for the loved ones, just like there's GA for the individual themselves. What advice do you have for parents who are terrified to tell anyone? How is breaking the silence a part of your own recovery?
Yeah, yeah, the shame and the secrecy is real. Like, I kept thinking, what will people think of me as a mother? Like, how did I not see this? My advice, start small. You don't have to tell everyone. Find one safe person, a therapist, a support group, a trusted friend. Just breaking that silence with one person can be incredibly freeing. Finding a Gam-Anon group is super helpful. When you hear another parent's story and think, oh God, that's exactly what happened to us, and you hear it because the stories are so similar, that shame starts to lose its grip. Um, and know that your child's addiction is not a reflection on your worth as a parent. You didn't cause it. You can't control it, and you can't pour from an empty cup. But you can get the support so you're not navigating this alone. So just start small and just start with one person and then more and more. And then, I really suggest the Gam-Anon group.
I think that's such good advice, just for another parent to hear that
Mhm.
they're not alone and that there are other parents that are in the same boat, and to just slowly open up to those trusted people is really valuable. Um, so your son's 1 year gamble free, which is amazing. But you mentioned having to learn to live with that uncertainty and accepting that relapse is a possibility. And I'm curious how you maintain hope and a healthy relationship while living in that dual truth.
Yeah, yeah. It's ongoing work, rebuilding trust is a two-way street. For me, it meant learning to have open communication with him without interrogation. It meant learning to give up control. It meant being honest with him about my own mistakes through our journey together. We talk about it. There was a time I was really angry. I didn't understand how willpower didn't work. I didn't understand the power this addiction has over young lives. Now we can talk openly about gambling in our family with my husband, with our kids, and we have to. Like gambling is everywhere. Every ad, every game, every celebrity endorsement. You can't watch sports now without being bombarded with ads. So living with uncertainty means accepting that I may never know if he's gambling free. But I know that I feel it in my gut and I choose to believe he is. And I also choose to be present either way.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for sharing your story and letting us kind of ask some questions that we really feel will help anybody that is watching this be able to have the strength to take that first step and to ask for, additional support. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. This is something I'm super passionate about. I want to help other families, like myself. It's a road and you need help.
Yeah, thanks.